Hello, in this video I am briefly going to talk about two different types of architectures. One is n layer architecture and second is n tier architecture. So you will get some idea about what layered architecture and what is tier architecture. So you will get some idea about layer and tier as well. What is n layer architecture? In n layer architecture, code base is separated by different layers, and the codes in your solution for your application or for your software will be organized logically. A monolithic and modular monolithic architecture can contain different layers inside it. So you will get some idea about what is modular monolithic and what is monolithic architecture is, and how the layers can be contained inside the monolithic and modular monolithic application or code base. Second, n-tier architecture. Here, code base will be separated by different tiers, and each tier will contain physical separation and can be deployed individually. In the layered architecture, in the n-layer architecture, if I go back, the whole code bases and all the layers inside a code base will be deployed as a whole. So you cannot separate each layer from the entire solution, and you cannot deploy each layer individually. But for the tiered architecture, you can deploy your individual tier separately in your server, deployment server, because each tier will be physically separated. So each tier will have its own code base in the solution, in the software solution that I wanted to mean. And third, each tier may contain layered architecture inside it. So each individual tier can also contain different layer inside it. So you can organize your code in a layered way, in a layered architecture way for each tier. So you can have presentation tier. For the presentation tier, you have different code base. You can have application tier where it can contain API layer, business logic layer, and data access layers. And application tier is a separate application solution that can be deployed individually in the application server, in a different server, or can be deployed in the same server but individually can be deployed. And finally, the data tier, it is basically database or storage where you will store your data and will be deployed in the database or storage server. And the application tier data access layer will be communicating with the data tier. Now I am going to show you some code that I already post into my GitHub repository to show you the practical implementation of the layered architecture and tiered architecture. So here, this is a sample application named loosely coupled app. This is basically the modular monolithic application. So you will see that every application, every modules, one is loosely coupled app, one is loosely coupled data, and .model and .service. Every modules are actually containing their own project. So this is the app project. This is basically in the C# .NET application. And here, this is the app project. This is the data project. This is the model project. And this is the business layer, basically the service project. So every project is residing inside a single solution. So loosely coupled application is a solution, and in this solution, these 4 projects are residing. So this is a modular monolithic application where a particular solution, software solution or software code base will contain multiple projects inside it. Here, in this case, there are 4 projects. One is for presentation layer, one is for data access, and one is for business logic. So in the loosely coupled app, this application this is basically treating as a user interface layer where it will contain the user interface, and also user interface layer will contain the HTML pages where the user will see in the browser, and it will contain the controller like API controller or like other this kind of controllers. This is basically normal controller, and this is API controller. Here in this sample I am using the API controller basically. So this module will contain the views and as well as the controllers. So this particular application is separated in different layers as well. So there are views also. Here in this case I have actually, for a sample, I have created some views so that it will show in the browser. So this is a basically presentation layer which is containing controllers, and this is the data access layer where I have the repositories which will communicate with the database. And this is the business logic layer. It will contain some services where I will write some business logics, calculations or something that is needed for the business. So this is the modular monolithic, and here this is the basically the layered architecture, and each entire monolithic application is basically separated with different layers. And another application, this is basically done using Java a long time ago, and this is basically a monolithic application. It is not a modular monolithic. This application is containing all the application layer, data access layer, business logic layer inside one project, inside one solution. This entire solution is not separated is not separated by different projects for different layers. Rather, this entire solution is containing one project, and this entire solution is actually containing the presentation, business logic, and data access layer. And both the monolithic and modular monolithic application will be deployed as a whole. So this whole project with this entire solution will be deployed as a whole. We cannot separate each project, or we cannot deploy each project separately. Rather, all the projects will be deployed with one solution. The codes are just logically organized. And for the monolithic application here, the web folder is containing the presentation layer, user interface layer. It is containing some views, and that will show the data to the browser. And internally, when client gives some input or gets some data from the backend, it will communicate with the business logic layer, and business logic layer will communicate with the data access layer, and in turn data access layer will be communicating with the database. So for the another layer, this is the user interface layer in the web, and this is the application layer, and it is containing the data access layer and business logic layer. So this is containing the controllers, API controller, and the user interface layer will communicate with the controllers, and controllers will communicate with the business logic layer, where it will do some calculations, business logics, conditions, and all the other things. And this will in turn will communicate with the data access layer. Data access layer will contain some repositories. This is entity, basically, which are those entities are mapped to the database table. And if I go to the business logic layer, categories, service implementation, data access layer, here, those are basically actually communicating with the actual database or storage. So here there is the application, business presentation layer, business logic layer, and data access layer. And data access layer is communicating with the database. So this is the monolithic layered architecture in monolithic application. And finally, I'll show you the tiered architecture. Here, each tier will be separated physically, physical separation. Each tier will have their own separate deployment and will be deployed separately. So for this sample application, I have a different tier, which is the user interface tier, I mean the presentation tier. This is done by Spring Boot, and this is containing the actually the presentation layer here is being done with the Angular. It is an Angular application because since this is a separate tier, so I can pick up the framework, so language, React, Angular, whatever I can choose for this particular tier, and it is individually can be deployed to the server. So this is containing all the views related things. Since it is an Angular application, it is containing the HTML, TypeScript, and CSS, and it has its all the package related things, stuffs, and also the other related files. So this is basically the presentation tier. Presentation tier itself can contain different layers. If you need, you can organize your code in layers. And this is the backend tier. Backend tier is basically the application tier. One is presentation tier and backend is the application tier. And application tier is being done with Spring Boot, and here the presentation tier is done by Angular framework. I mean the Angular JS. And this Spring Boot application tier is containing layer inside it. So it has its own API layer, data access layer, and business logic layer for this particular application tier. And this can also be deployed individually. So for a tiered application, we can deploy each tier individually. And in the application tier, we have the API layer, which will contain all the APIs, a REST API in this case. And we have data access layer. We have business logic layer, and business logic layer is here is the services, where all the business logics, as I told earlier, that we can write some calculations, conditions, and other things, business related things. And this business logic layer will contact with the data access layer, and data access layer in turn will communicate with the databases. So here the repositories, here the DTOs, data transfer objects, models for the table mapping with the database, and for the repositories, these are the interfaces. I'm searching for the implementation. This is iTopic content repository. And basically this iTopic content repository interface is extending the JPA repository. So these repositories are basically communicating with the data access. This is the data access layer, and this data access layer, the classes and codes in the data access layer is basically communicating with the database, the storage. So in short, the application tier will contain API layer. API layer will communicate with the business logic layer, that is services, and services business logic layer will communicating with the data access layer, here in this case repositories, and data access layer will communicate with the databases or storage. And data tier is basically the database or storage. So in brief, the difference between the layered architecture and tiered architecture is that layered architecture, layers will be deployed as a whole in one solution, and in the tiered architecture we can deploy each tier individually, and each tier will communicate with one another, and each tier or one tier can contain multiple layers inside it. Okay, I think you have understood the tiered architecture and layered architecture, and hopefully you can implement this in your software architecture whenever needed. So when you choose which architecture, it totally depends on the client's requirements and your business needs.